A blazing car fire.
They had never seen a car that had sustained a fire that burned that hot.
A body burned beyond recognition.
There was no legs. There was no head that I could see.
A crazy, sinister plot.
It was brilliant in its simplicity.
They got the idea from watching CSI and Law and Order.
And a mystery as big as Texas.
This is the weirdest case I've ever been involved with.
June 18th, 2004, 5:34 a.m. Police outside Burnett, Texas, get a 911 call.
Burnett County 911, do you have an emergency?
Yes, ma'am. We have a car that's run off the road. It's over a steep bluff that's on fire. We cannot get out there and tell if there's anybody in it or anything.
And you're sure it's a vehicle?
Yeah, I'm seeing it. It's engulfed in flames right now. You can make it out that it's definitely a car.
Local fire departments and the highway patrol respond to the call.
When I arrived there, the fire department was still on scene from 2 different volunteer fire agencies, and the vehicle was still on fire. They had taken all the hoses and connected them together to climb down the steep embankment to fight the fire. The vehicle was way down in a ravine, 30 feet or so.
After firemen put out the blaze, they discovered the charred remains of the driver.
It appeared from the scene that there had been a horrible automobile accident and that the body had burned up and that someone had been killed.
I started reconstructing the accident about where it might have left the roadway, and the vehicle was either pushed off the cliff or slowly rolled off the cliff because there was no skid marks around the area.
Then, a bystander named Lori Daniels approaches police. She tells them she thinks the victim is her 23-year-old son, Clayton.
She was crying, and she started telling me a story about her son was supposed to be coming over to bring her some stuff, and she was afraid that he was involved in the accident.
Lori Daniels explains that she was on her way to Clayton's house when she saw the fire and recognized his car. He tells police Clayton and his wife Molly live nearby. Corporal Talamantes calls Molly at home. Molly confirms Clayton had taken the car and left for his mom's house. Talamantes asks her what her husband was wearing.
She was telling me that he was wearing this Harley-Davidson cap, I believe it was, that he always wore. And I was trying to locate all that in the vehicle.
The car is removed from the scene and taken to a salvage yard. Deputy State Fire Marshal Janine Mather is called in to examine the charred remains.
Well, I looked in the engine and ruled out all accidental sources.
Mather knows that most car fires start in the engine compartment. She notices that this one seems to have started on the driver's seat.
The burn patterns on the hood indicated that the fire penetrated through the firewall from the driver's side into the engine compartment.
Samples of the charred front seat are sent to the state's arson lab for analysis. A blazing car fire.
They had never seen a car that had sustained a fire that burned that hot.
A body burned beyond recognition.
There was no legs. There was no head that I could see.
A crazy, sinister plot.
It was brilliant in its simplicity.
They got the idea from watching CSI and Law and Order.
And a mystery as big as Texas.
This is the weirdest case I've ever been involved with.
June 18th, 2004, 5:34 a.m. Police outside Burnett, Texas get a 911 call.
Harnett County 911, do you have an emergency?
Yes, ma'am. We have a car that's run off the road. It's over a steep bluff that's on fire. We cannot get down there and tell if there's anybody in it or anything.
And you're sure it's a vehicle?
Yeah, I'm seeing it. It's engulfed in flames.
The wheels were melted. The inside of the vehicle was so badly burned you couldn't see what was what. And that the body was burned so bad that it didn't leave any kind of skeletal remains and no extremities.
This was the hottest fire anyone had ever seen. There was no paint left on that car.
Inside the car was a lot of paperback books, which added to the fuel. And even the car, if it doesn't have any extra trash or anything in the car, it has approximately 500 pounds of fire load when you count the seats.
With all the windows and the sunroof open, the fire quickly gained strength.
You had a chimney in effect. Once the fire started, it was just sucking in the air, and then that would make it burn more rapidly also.
Debris from the vehicle is sent to the Texas State Arson Lab for examination.
It was unusual. It was really a hot fire, and so they were suspicious that there may have been an ignitable liquid used in it.
Fire lab criminalists run tests on the debris from the vehicle. It's quickly apparent some kind of accelerant was used to kickstart the fire.
In this case, it met the criteria of being an isoparaffinic product, which is something that's commonly found in charcoal lighters.
Why would somebody be transporting lighter fluid? And there was nothing, no reason that Clayton Daniels would have been doing so.
A final search of the vehicle produces the last pieces of evidence. The charred remains of a hat and a shoe. Clayton's wife, Molly, identifies the hat.
I located a hook that belonged on a bill of a ball cap and a part of an insignia that looked like it said Harley Davidson. There was also a Faded Glory button in the debris.
Clayton's mother IDs the shoe.
Laurie Daniels was instrumental in identifying what was believed to be a piece of a shoe that belonged to Clayton Daniels that was found in that vehicle. The initial identity of Clayton Daniels was made.
Clayton Daniels worked as a mechanic, doing odd jobs.
He was going back to school to get his high school diploma. Rather than get a GED, he was going for the diploma.
Clayton is the stepfather of Molly's older son. Together, they have a new baby girl.
He definitely was a good father to both of the kids.
Molly works as a receptionist in Austin.
She's very intelligent. She was in gifted and talented classes, and yeah, she was always a good student.
She had a goal to be in accounting. She wanted to be a CPA. As a matter of fact, she has her accounting degree.
What's left of the body is sent to the medical examiner.
There were no limbs left, nothing that they could fingerprint, no skull remaining. So the teeth were gone. There was nothing to identify from dental records.
Investigators are sure the fire was set. The question is, who set it and why? They decide to visit the victim's wife, Molly Daniels.
I interviewed Molly Daniels, and she was so calm and did not show any emotion. And I asked her, God, if I just lost my husband, I'd be devastated. And she said, well, I don't show emotion in public.
She came out right and said there was only 14 pounds of body mass left. And she told all this to me with absolutely no emotion.
She handled herself in a very guarded way, led you to believe that yes, she wanted to be, of course, very cooperative. However, she asked a lot of questions, more to do with details about the wreck and what they think happened than it did with the condition of her husband and what happened to him.
A memorial service for Clayton Daniels is held 3 days after the fire.
The crash happened on, I believe, a Friday, and the Monday is when we had the service. There was definitely pictures everywhere. They had a motorcycle up at the front of the stage.
Again, Molly's behavior.
Something more to this investigation.
Then, investigators make a surprising discovery.
We did learn that she had an insurance policy.
The policy is for $110,000. Molly tries almost immediately to collect on the policy.
It was very strange because they were very young, in their early 20s, yet they had these huge life insurance policies.
When police ask questions, Molly offers an explanation.
Molly Daniels had worked between 3 and 5 years earlier for an insurance company. And we found out all the workers were encouraged very strongly to take out policies.
But the insurance company is skeptical. They refuse to pay until more is known about the accident.
They wouldn't close the investigation, and she definitely got very heated over it because she couldn't collect on it without the death certificate.
We talked about maybe the fact that Molly Daniels could have killed her husband and she wanted to collect insurance money.
We started wondering if this was, insurance fraud or murder, or if we had some other crimes going on.
When investigators start digging, they find some disturbing facts about Clayton's background. And the autopsy soon throws an unbelievable twist into an already bizarre case. The more police dig into a fatal car fire near Burnett, Texas, the more it looks suspicious. The accident appears to have been staged, and tests show the intense fire was fueled with charcoal lighter fluid. Local journalists are starting to pick up on the story.
I knew something was different, something was wrong. There was a couple of questions I forgot to ask, so I called back the dispatcher and tried to get some of that information, and a red flag went up because she said she could not talk to me about this case anymore.
Clayton Daniels' death is becoming big news in a small town.
Burnett is a small community, about 3,000 people. The kind of considered a country town, older folks, agriculture-based community.
While investigators await the autopsy results, they run a background check on Clayton Daniels. It turns out Clayton Daniels has a lot of enemies.
He was a drug addict and had a short fuse and got in fights a lot. Not too many people had good things to say about him, even his friends.
Burnett Police Captain Paul Nelson knew Clayton all too well.
Clayton's reputation while he was in high school and growing up is that he always drinking alcohol, partying, always driving real fast, getting stopped by the police department.
It turns out Clayton Daniels also has a more serious criminal record. A year before the car fire, Clayton had pled guilty to sexually molesting his cousin.
His cousin came forward, and she was a teenager, and this had happened when she was younger. It was one of those outcries that he had sexually assaulted her.
He, of course, hired an attorney, and as the case went through the legal system, it was agreed at some point that Mr. Daniels, the defendant, would plead guilty. He would be under intensive supervision, and he would have to register as a sex offender for life.
Detectives wonder, could Clayton's death somehow be related to the molestation charge?
We started bouncing ideas around. Some of the ideas were, since Clayton Daniels was convicted of aggravated sexual assault, that the family of that child came back and did this to him, killed him and burned his body up.
There was also the theory that his sentence was too light, and maybe the relatives of the girl who was molested wanted to try to get back at him and had gone after him.
Or still another possibility. Had his shady past finally caught up with him?
Clayton was known to associate with known meth dealers in his time here in the city of Burnet.
There had been some connections between Clayton and some drug dealers, some rumors about methamphetamine usage and possibly production. They were just thinking, well, was he transporting items to be used in a meth lab? Is that what he was doing when this happened?
One of the theories that they threw out was that he was taking the meth, that instead of selling it, he was taking it himself. Then they got mad because they weren't getting any money.
Meanwhile, Clayton's widow, Molly, is attracting attention on her own.
Molly's coworkers were very surprised that they discovered that she was already dating.
I would never judge her for that or tell her it was too soon or that it was wrong. But yeah, I did think it was extremely soon.
Her new boyfriend's name is Jake Gregg, and no one knows much about him. Molly's being secretive, and Jake keeps to himself.
I started thinking, well, why does she feel the need to hide this Jake guy from us? You know, obviously, I'm her sister.
People are beginning to talk. Is Jake somehow involved? Could Clayton's death be part of some murderous love triangle?
It had just been a month after the accident, and she already had a new man in her life.
Investigators let me know that Jacob Craig was someone they were looking at, and we did a data search and found very little.
Then, as investigators puzzle through their leads, the autopsy results come back. They're inconclusive.
There was something more to the story than just this individual was in this car involved in a fiery wreck, because in the medical examiner's report, the cause of death was stated as unknown.
Investigators ask for additional tests. In cases like this, Texas state guidelines recommend DNA analysis.
I requested DNA. I wanted DNA samples to make sure that this was going to be Clayton Daniels. Talking with Clayton Daniels' mother, Lori, she did agree to DNA testing.
Clayton's wife, Molly Daniels, also agrees. She won't receive any insurance payout until testing proves beyond doubt that the corpse is her husband.
In layman's terms, DNA is sort of the encyclopedia. It's the master log of all information that determines what we are.
Using a comparison DNA sample provided by Clayton Daniels' mother, the DNA lab at the University of North Texas's Center for Human Identification begins tests on the charred remains of the body. The tests are hampered by the poor quality of the DNA samples.
Obtaining a viable sample for DNA testing from the burned remains was not a pleasant experience. We had to use a hacksaw on the hip bone, and we felt at that time that it was a good sample, but the lab was going to have to verify that.
Part of the hip bone was sent to us. We also sent some very charred, burnt, deep muscle tissue. They were so highly burnt that we had to go back a number of times, re-extract, and obtain samples where we were able to get clear, decisive genetic information for making the comparisons. We simply compare the pattern and either make matches or determine if that piece could have come from the offspring.
In the end, it relies on the expertise of the technicians.
It's a very visual process. Do things match or don't they match?
In this case, they don't match.
I got the phone call telling me they had gotten the DNA test back. So I sat up in the chair and he said, "It's not Clayton." And my reaction was, wow, really?
At first, investigators are stunned. Then they're shocked.
He told me that the body was actually female.
He just said, "It's a woman," and I screamed.
This is something that happens in bigger cities like maybe New York or Washington, D.C., not in the Hill Country.
What started as a car fire is now a case of fraud and possibly murder. Investigators decide to keep the DNA test results secret. Then they start digging.
Our first question was, who is the victim?
Investigators desperately need to talk to Clayton Daniels and Jake Gregg. But Clayton's on the run, avoiding questions about the charred woman's body found in his car. And Jake Gregg's a hard man to find.
He was a truck driver, so he was on the road a lot, which was a lot of the reason we were never able to see him.
We didn't know if this was a suspect. We didn't know if this was someone who could possibly be implicated in the case.
When investigators talk with neighbors, they learn that Jake only visits Molly late at night and is always gone by the next morning.
There was definitely a growing frustration because there were so many occasions where we had the opportunity to meet him and we were never allowed to. There was always some reason why.
Then, police get a break. As investigators question Molly's small children, they discover a bizarre and shocking plot. A fatal car fire outside Burnett, Texas, has turned into a curious mystery. The charred body found in the car belongs not to the presumed victim, Clayton Daniels, but to an unidentified woman. Clayton is missing. His wife, Molly, has a mysterious new boyfriend. As investigators look for answers, they talk with Molly's young children.
When Molly introduced her new boyfriend, Jake, to her kids, the oldest one, Caleb, was very confused. He didn't understand because her new boyfriend looked just like Daddy. And they kept telling him, no, this is not Daddy. Daddy died.
He had black hair, and that was it. I mean, he still looked just like Clayton Daniels always did, but he had real black hair.
Investigators put a tail on Molly. They follow her as she leaves her office to meet her new boyfriend, Jake, for lunch in Austin.
And we opened up both doors and walked in. I looked across the room there and seen that it was Clayton.
Investigators are shocked. Molly's new boyfriend, Jake Gregg, not only looks like Clayton Daniels, he is Clayton Daniels.
We ordered him to lay on the floor and put his hands behind his back, and at which time he did.
As word spreads through the community that Clayton and Jake are the same person, his family and friends are not completely surprised.
His own grandmother said that at one time she had gone by the house, Molly's house, to see the granddaughter, and that she had opened the garage door and seen him, she thought, but that the person had run off.
There was an incident when Molly's sister was visiting. She had seen legs hanging out of the closet on the floor, and she ran into Molly and said, "You got a man in your bedroom?" And Molly's like, "No, there's not." And Molly was pretty loud about it. And so by the time they got back into the bedroom, there was nothing there.
Even his own father at some point had said that he thought that he had seen him around town.
Clayton Daniels is taken into custody, charged with failing to report for his 30-day jail sentence on the sexual molestation charge. Molly is also arrested and charged with harboring a fugitive. Her mother takes custody of the kids.
My cell phone rang, and it was the Texas Ranger asking me who I was. And then he said, "Well, I hate to tell you this, Mrs. Litsky, but Molly and Clay have both been arrested and they're both in jail." I'm like, "Okay, so where are the kids?" He said, "They're at the sitters and she wants you to come get them."
Armed with a warrant, police search Molly's house. At the house, investigators discover text messages between the couple. The search quickly reveals that Molly is the brains behind a very complex con.
There was a folder marked Mexico, and in that folder were to-do lists on everything that needed to be done before they went to Mexico. She had obtained a birth certificate for Jake, a high school transcript for Jake, and a divorce decree from California for Jake, setting up his new identity. And there was also names of plastic surgeons. Apparently they were going to have plastic surgery in Mexico. Clayton was going to get his teeth fixed, and she was going to get a tummy tuck.
Investigators also find evidence tying them to the car fire.
We located charcoal starter fluids. There was 2 bottles, 2 different brands, and I brought both bottles to the lab for testing, and one of them was consistent with what was located in the vehicle.
Investigators are now certain Clayton and Molly set the car fire as part of a life insurance scam. Based on cell phone records, they pieced together Clayton's life on the run.
He didn't come out during the day, and that seemed to work for a while. He also had a new Texas ID card under his new name.
For a time, Clayton went to Abilene and got a job at a fruit stand.
He did have a job for a while, but I don't think that he kept it. I think that ended on bad terms.
In the end, Clayton couldn't stay away. He came home to Molly.
He had to come back because they couldn't keep their hands off of each other.
But one burning question remains. Were Clayton and Molly capable of murder?
There's only a few options. You need a body.
We wanted to know the identity of the victim, and we assumed that they had murdered somebody.
Neither Clayton nor Molly will talk to the authorities. For investigators, there's one last question. Where did Clayton and Molly get the body?
Clayton had told a cellmate that he's no murderer. He dug up a body, and the cellmate informed police.
But whose body was it? Deputy State Fire Marshal Mather decides to have a woman-to-woman talk with Molly.
I asked Molly, Clayton didn't tell you anything? And she goes, no. And I told her, I find that very hard to believe. As a woman, you didn't ask questions? And she said, well, he did tell me that the grave was on a county road between Burnett and Lampasas by some kind of utility station. And after that interview, I contacted Trooper Talamantes and gave him that information.
Talamantes travels to a local rural cemetery, looking for any sign that a grave may have been tampered with. He finds none.
I'm trying to think about where another cemetery might be, and I remember working an accident where a lady had gone off the road near the Seminole pipeline. That's a natural gas pipeline substation there on a county road north of Barnett. So I remember there was a cemetery down there.
The Pebble Mound Cemetery is in a very remote area, perfect for digging up a body in the middle of the night without anyone seeing you.
As soon as I got out of the car and looked inside the cemetery, the grave to my immediate right was disturbed. All the other graves around there were groomed, but this one looked as if somebody had dug a hole and filled it back up, and after the rain and everything, the grave had sunk a little bit.
Talamantes immediately radios Deputy State Fire Marshal Mather. She joins him at the grave.
We both looked at the grave, looked at each other, and nodded our heads. That was where the body came from.
The grave marker says Charlotte Davis.
I noticed that the temporary marker was still in place, and it had the funeral home on it, and that assisted in me obtaining the information on who Charlotte was and her family members almost immediately. If this temporary marker hadn't been here, it would have probably taken weeks for me to obtain that information.
81-year-old Charlotte Davis was wheelchair-bound. She had a few disabilities, mental and physical disabilities. She's considered a very sweet person.
A background check on Charlotte Davis shows she had lived a difficult life. Her hard luck had followed her to the grave.
She was an elderly woman who had had a hard life. She had lived at the mental institution when she was younger, and in her later years moved to a group home in Burnett.
A blazing car fire.
They had never seen a car that had sustained a fire that burned that hot.
A body burned beyond recognition.
There was no legs. There was no head that I could see.
A crazy, sinister plot.
It was brilliant in its simplicity.
They got the idea from watching CSI and Law and Order.
And a mystery as big as Texas.
This is the weirdest case I've ever been involved with.
June 18th, 2004, 5:34 a.m. Police outside Burnett, Texas, get a 911 call.
Burnett County 911, do you have an emergency?
Yes, ma'am. We have a car that's run off the road. It's over a steep bluff that's on fire. We cannot get down there and tell if there's anybody in it or anything.
And you're sure it's a vehicle?
Yeah, I'm seeing it. It's engulfed in flames right now. You can make it out that it's definitely a car.
Local fire departments and the highway patrol respond to the call.
When I arrived there, the fire department was still on scene from two different volunteer fire agencies, and the vehicle was still on fire. They had taken all the hoses and connected them together to climb down the steep embankment.
Because they've become that adept at going back and picking up everything that's been used on a computer.
It turns out Molly Daniels had done some serious homework. Her computer is a mother lode of incriminating information.
The company that she worked for had recently installed some sort of software that recorded every keystroke their employees made during the time frame that Molly was planning this whole disappearance.
And they had this really thick printout of stuff off the computer. And her attorney said until she saw it, she maintained she didn't know anything about it. And he looked at me and goes, "You told me?" And I said, "I know I told you." But he just was like dumbfounded that she would lie to him. And I'm like, yeah, she's gonna lie, because if she thinks it's gonna get out of her trouble, she's gonna lie about it.
Molly Daniels had accessed through her office computer many internet sites, including how to get away with murder, how to burn a body, how to find a body in a cemetery.
Molly's computer gives investigators the evidence they need. As Charlotte Davis's remains are carefully reburied at the cemetery, investigators prepare their case. Can they convince a jury of such an unbelievable scheme? With Molly and Clayton Daniels now in custody, investigators can breathe a sigh of relief and ponder how close the couple came to pulling off their scam.
It was brilliant in its simplicity because of the fact that they did use a body, they did create a scene that worked. They almost got away with it.
They were 2 weeks from leaving the state of Texas, fleeing to Mexico.
Only a few questions remain. Why Charlotte Davis?
Clayton Daniels picked Charlotte Davis randomly. He went to Pebble Mountain Cemetery and didn't give a thought to who the person was that he was digging up.
Police wonder, were there other people involved?
How could two people dig up a grave all by themselves, pull out the casket, pull out the body, put it back, cover it up with dirt? It just seemed like a really big task and a lot of trouble to go to, and too much for just one or two people. We were suspicious. Were there more people that were involved and possibly were going to share the insurance money?
No evidence is ever found that anyone else was involved. In the end, investigators believe that Molly planned the scam, that Molly and Clayton together dug up the body, and that Clayton set the fire. After the blaze was set, Clayton left immediately on his motorcycle for Abilene. As the trial approaches, Molly Daniels is unrepentant.
Molly comes across to me as being above everybody, that she's smarter than everybody, and that she feels like she didn't do, anything wrong.
He was going to have to be a registrant, a sex offender the rest of his life. It would brand him and it'd brand his family, and it just wasn't fair.
They lived across the street from an elementary school, which they were going to have to move, and there was a $100,000 life insurance policy that they could also collect.
But for all of her cunning, Molly made some very big mistakes.
So they were able to go back and see every website she had visited, everything she had typed, and got quite a bit of information against her that revealed that she was actually the one who was planning the disappearance and the burning of the vehicle.
Molly also fell for the wrong man.
She's never had a lot of self-respect, so for a person like Clay to come along, he did prey on her.
She may have been the brains, he was the incentive. He was the recipient of all the good things that were going to come from her work. So who's the bad guy? Well, we've got two.
As Molly and Clayton await trial, they seem indifferent to the damage they've caused, especially to a little boy who was told his father was dead.
To me, one of the aspects of this case that was the most horrendous was the effect it had on the young boy, Molly Daniels' son, who was living with them when they hatched this plan and when they carried out the plan.
The aftermath with these kids has been horrendous. I don't think she realized what she'd put the kids through.
I'm still very angry with her. Not on my behalf, for what she did to Caleb. Everything they'd put him through, telling him, you have to lie, encouraging him to lie to people.
Even the seasoned prosecutors trying the case are stunned by the couple's callousness.
I would say this is a case that shows humans at their very worst. It shows complete disregard for others. It shows the most horrid feelings of entitlement, having no compassion for a poor woman that's buried, laid to rest in a cemetery. No thought whatsoever for how this will affect her loved ones.
Molly and Clayton Daniels are tried separately, but the judge shows no mercy for either of them. On May 5th, 2005, Molly pleads guilty to insurance fraud and hindering apprehension. She is sentenced to 20 years in prison, the maximum for such a conviction.
I think she pleaded guilty on her attorney's advice, but they went to trial for sentencing thinking that a jury sentencing would be less than a judge sentencing, and I think that backfired on them because the jury was so mad they wanted to give her more time than what they could legally. They asked if there was any way they could give her more.
In January 2006, Clayton pleads guilty to arson and the desecration of a cemetery. Because the crimes were committed while he was on probation as a sex offender, a judge sentences him to a total of 30 years in prison.
He just seemed like a regular person, a regular guy.
But Clayton and Molly Daniels' solution to their problems was anything but regular.
She said she got the idea from watching CSI. And of course my first response is, did you ever watch the end of the show where they got caught?
Their fatal error was just trying to do it to begin with. That's one of the more difficult frauds to succeed with because you have to have a deceased person. And once you have a deceased person, you have law enforcement investigating, and they go after homicides pretty hard. The insurance companies have a lot of money at stake, so they're not going to just idly pay the claim.
At the end of the trial, Corporal William Talamantes receives a special commendation from his sergeant.
And he was happy that I took the time and initiative to say, there's something wrong here, let's call somebody else in, let's get a little help here. And we had a better turnout.
In the end, Clayton and Molly's scheme to erase his past and buy a new future was doomed by the determination of William Talamantez, Janine Mather, and the other investigators. Without their persistence, Clayton and Molly Daniels' macabre plan might well have succeeded.